One person was confirmed dead in Arkansas, and now authorities say the storms are responsible for the deaths of 3 people in eastern Oklahoma. The first federal trial on the opioid crisis has been scrapped, as most of the defendants have reached settlements.
Judge Dan Polster announced from the bench that the drug distributors, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, and McKesson, along with drug maker Teva, have reached a settlement in lawsuits filed by 2 Ohio counties. A lawyer for one of those counties said the settlement adds up to $260 million. The deal resolves this case, but efforts by the companies to settle more than 2,000 other cases on the toll of opioids have not yet been handled. I'm Shelley Adler.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he has failed to form a majority government in parliament. It's another major setback for the Israeli leader. Stocks higher ahead of the close. This is SRN News. SRN's Michael Harrington reports on a pro-life victory in Pittsburgh.
The Third Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals says the city's buffer zones around abortion clinics cannot be used to stop people from offering counseling to women seeking to end their pregnancies. Alliance Defending Freedom sued on behalf of the pro-life activists, and attorney Alyssa Graves says, quote, "The government can't censor peaceful pro-life conversations on public sidewalks. Citizens have the freedom to share a message of hope and compassion with anyone." Michael Harrington, SRN News.
A federal appeals court has rejected the state of Louisiana's request that it toss out a lawsuit challenging a broad array of pro-life regulations. However, the ruling from a 3-judge panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals also said abortion advocates lacked standing to pursue many of their claims. The judges did conclude that a lower court ruling allowing the entire case to proceed was in error. This is SRN News. The U.S. ambassador to China defended plans to require Beijing's diplomats to report contacts with some Americans.
Terry Branstad adds that Washington is considering additional rules for employees of entities controlled by the ruling Communist Party. The change comes as the U.S., Australia, and some other governments are looking at possible Chinese efforts to spy or gain influence in their countries. It follows years of complaints from American and other diplomats about controls on their ability to move around China and to meet with officials and members of the public.
Correspondent Jeremy House reporting. White House Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney says there's no consideration of his resignation. He told Fox News Channel absolutely positively not. Last week, Mulvaney said the president still considers himself to be in the hospitality business. That was a comment that feeds into accusations that he's using his office to enrich himself. More details at srnnews.com. From Washington, I'm Greg Clugston.
Let's get it started in here.
The viewpoints of J. Michael McCoy, his co-hosts, guests, and callers are not necessarily those of any particular religion or denomination. They may or may not be the views of Webcast One Live, the cleaning guy, the woman who brings in cookies, the parking valet, the staff of The View from a Pew, Jill King, Lucinda, the graphic design lady, Justin, Bob, Brian, Linda, or anyone else of sound mind or questionable mental capacity. Should you be offended, provoked, triggered, intimidated, shocked, confused, or inspired to think independently, call our studio lines at 515-442-KPOG and join the conversation. After all, it's your voice we want to hear. Now, live from the Jordan Crossing Studios, here's your host,
Frank the Verse Thomas.
Well, hello, it is Frank the Verse Thomas here at View from the Pew. Voice is still not 100%, but it's better than it was Friday. Went home, drank lots of juice, ate a lot of fruit, drank some decaffeinated green tea and honey, done a little bit of gargling, and that's helped it get back as good as it is right now. I recorded 2 pre-records on the lifetalk.net, and so I'm going to try to I've been doing a lot of talking the last 2 weeks, and Try to give my voice a little bit of a rest this week. Just mostly talking on the radio and not so much other stuff. So hopefully it will, and I don't believe I'm sick anyway. It's been using my voice a lot recently, and so I of course take vitamins and certain things, and I'm trying to eat much more healthy than I used to, taking sugar out of my diet, excess sugar out of my diet. You can't get it all. I mean, you know, I was just looking the other day at 2% milk has got, I think, 11 grams of sugar in 2% milk. Why? I'm not understanding why there has to be sugar in certain things at all. I guess I know why, is because they want you addicted and hooked on the stuff because it's killing us. And what is that? Bob Montserrat talks about what's Satan's duty here on earth, and that's kill, steal, and destroy. So, we do our show every Monday through Friday here, 4 to 6 p.m. at Jordan Crossing Church. And if you would like to contact the show, you can do so by remembering this number and jotting it down in your contact list.
We want to hear from you, so give us a call on the Service Legends Talk and Text line, 515-442-5764. That's 515-442-KPOG.
All right, so typing a short message here, and I am just typing a quick message here on Facebook, and I want okay, so we're going to get going here. All right, so see what's Brian's got to say. You sound much better. Kind of like that really raspy voice, though. Well, thank you, Brian. Glad it's back as good as it is. Okay, I want to close out a couple of text messages. All right, so we're going to have our Sabbath school lessons. And that's lessons plural, obviously, because on Monday I always end up trying to catch up, and that's not Heinz variety. I'm always trying to catch up with Sabbath and Sunday. And so we will start with facing opposition on Sabbath. Sunday opposition begins, and Monday prophets encourage. So need to change my heading here for a second, and I just merely copy and paste that title in for today's program. It usually goes in the back of the window on the second camera. Alright, so let me get here, get our first news story up. I don't want to do that one first. Let me try this one. Did you know? Would it alarm you to know that there has been a 56% increase in suicide among young Americans in just the last 10 years? Would that set off some alarm bells for you? If you're in crisis, you can visit the suicidepreventionlifeline.org and know that you're not alone. But it's very hard to face the future when you don't have any hope. Today, our society offers more ways to entertain ourselves, more opportunities to bury our head in our work, our education, but it really offers very little hope at all. Most people spend most of their lives just wandering from one thing to another, looking for meaning and purpose. And of course, most of those journeys just come up empty. We may have a much higher standard of living than any other generation in history, but we also have the highest rates of addiction, depression, and suicide. As a society, we're deeply, deeply unhappy. And this is especially true for our young people. In fact, a report has just been released, discovered that there's a 56% increase in suicide among young adults from ages 10 to 24 just in the past 10 years. It's a disturbing trend. A report published Thursday by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found that from 2007 to 2017, the rate of Americans ages 10 to 24 who died by suicide rose by 56% from 6.8 deaths per 100,000 persons to 10.6 per. Is anyone going to argue when I say it looks like what we're doing for our young people is definitely not working? We appear to be rapidly running in the wrong direction, and yet our leaders just keep pushing us further down the same road. I was particularly horrified to learn that the report found that suicide rate for Americans ages 10 to 14 had almost tripled in that 10-year period. When broke down by age groups, the suicide rate for those aged 10 to 14 tripled. For teenagers 15 to 19, the rate surged 76% in that decade. Sometimes people criticize me for being too negative about our society, but the truth is that I'm often not being negative enough. Kids are killing themselves at an alarming, astounding rate because our society is feeding them an endless series of lies and giving them absolutely no hope for the future. Our society is deeply, deeply broken, and if we continue going down the same path, we're going to get similar results. We have completely and utterly failed our young people. And it's because we're teaching them the wrong things. Oh, we love to think that we have everything together, but the truth is that we are a complete mess and that we're passing on our flawed views to the next generation with devastating results. In addition to an unprecedented rise in suicide, rates of depression among our young people are escalating dramatically as well. Let me see. responding to a message, and my friend wants to know, are you on or off the air? Okay. So, a friend of mine is having some issues. He's having trouble with his PC ever since he put his brother on his friends list. Trying to find what's wrong. Okay. Just want to tell him nothing wrong here. Respond back to me if you read this. All right. So sometimes we friend people, and we can have some issues with our computer. All right, so let me see here. Get back to this story. Generation Z. Well, since 2014, millennials, or people who are 23 to 38 in 2019, have seen a 47% increase in major depression diagnosis, death or despair, dying from suicide, alcohol, drugs increased in the millennial population in the last 10 years. For Generation Z, mental illness continues. 2013, 13% of teens reported have experienced at least one major depressive episode in the past year. Pew Research reports in 2007, when millennials were teens, that number was just 8%. It shouldn't be real surprising when we teach our kids that they came from monkeys, and that the only thing they have to look forward to at the end of this life is dying. In between, we offer them all sorts of temporary pleasures that don't give them any sort of long-lasting meaning or purpose, in order to pacify them, to keep them from asking too many hard questions. Because if you start asking hard questions, you quickly find out that virtually every major system in our society is broken. But we urge our young people to work really hard so that someday they can take our places as important cogs in a machine that's rapidly steamrolling towards oblivion. If you only read that last paragraph, you'd probably come to the conclusion that I'm a deeply depressed individual. But that's not true at all. And that is only because I've fundamentally rejected the lies society tries to feed me. Not depressed on any pills. Only pills I take is vitamin supplements. Trying to live healthier and a happier existence. We were all created for a purpose. We were put on this planet for a time such as this. I want to share this article. See what this says. He is here. Good job. Glad to have you here. Good to have you here. All right. Sharing an article with someone. right, so I share an article with someone that the article I just shared with you. And Julie loves my video, and I want to thank you, Julie. Appreciate your support. Okay. Here's an article, 5 ways to help someone struggling with depression or anxiety. Well, I can tell you a couple of ways to deal with anxiety in particular is get off all your artificial stimulants. Tobacco, alcohol, drugs, caffeine, anything that is a stimulant will eventually cause anxiety in your life. So that's one thing you can do. If the statistic is even somewhat true that 1 in 4 of us struggles with mental health, you're either struggling with this yourself or you know someone who is. And if you care at all, you'd truly like to help someone who's depressed. 1, these are 5 things you can do. Sometimes they don't give you all 5 because they want to charge you 99 cents to get all the answers. But here's 5 practical ways that you can help others that suffer with depression or anxiety. Practice the ministry of presence. Let people know that you care, and you're not just swooping in for a moment and then running away. Stick around. And let them know that they're not alone. Pain often feels terribly isolating. Seek to have empathy. Seek to understand. No one can fully know what someone else feels. Nobody's being so foolish. All you can ever do is know how you would feel in a similar situation. No one can know truly what the other person feels, but seek to understand. What beliefs do they hold? What traumas have they experienced? What challenges have they faced or did they face now? What past experiences has led them to respond? If you're not a trained therapist, don't try to be one, but seeking to understand will help you be helpful. Offer and take small bites. When you see a severely malnourished child, you don't bring them to a medical facility and set a pizza in front of them. When a person's system is so overwhelmed, they can only take in nourishment in bite-sized doses. I once went without food for 7 days, and 3 days, I believe 5 days, 7 days, 5 days, and 3 days twice. And your stomach shrinks. And when you first start eating, you can't even think of overeating. To whatever degree you've been able to understand the hurting person, imagine that you've jumped into the pit with them. But what you may well have that the hurting person doesn't have is some appreciation of where the steps are to climb out. You might be able to say, here, take my hand, let me show you where one small step is, and take a step with them. Don't be a hero, number 4. People who try to be a hero can quickly get overwhelmed themselves. You become burned out or unable to continue to be helpful. It's important to be a good enough student of yourself that you'll know what kind of mental, emotional, spiritual nourishment you need to stay filled up. That's the only way you will be a help to anyone. You can't fix them. So don't try. You can't force your help on anyone. You can't control whether they'll get better or not. Instead, if you're able to enter their world to some degree, you may be extremely helpful by helping them help themselves. You can encourage, celebrate small efforts, small improvements, and small victories. But just try walking alongside the person and help them to take the steps they need to climb out the hole they're in. A friend who sticks around can be life-changing for many people. The epidemic of loneliness in society is unhealthy in many ways. You're truly helpful by just simply being there. A hurting person may struggle to reach out for help. You can help them do that. You can perhaps help them find a Christian coach through your church, a Christian counselor, or a pastor. But most important, help them experience God's intervention. When someone is hurting and feeling isolated, prayer must not be trite or overly religious. Just invite Jesus to be present and continue to do so. You may be someone's only lifeline. Take care to get your own nourishment along the way and enjoy the privilege of being the hands and the feet of Jesus to one of his children. Those 5 practical ways to help those who are hurting. Here's a study, and I think this is positive news. Let me see what we got here. I was thinking I got the right page up. Divorce rates plummet in Florida City thanks to Christian Family Initiative. Faith and family tend to be mutually reinforcing. Married couples are more likely to attend church, and churchgoers are more likely to form and maintain healthy marriages, says Paul DeGance, or DeGance. This week, the Institute for Family Studies and the Philanthropy Roundtable released a study showing that a Christian pro-family initiative had measurable impact in driving down divorce rates in Jacksonville, Florida. The Jacksonville Baptist Association launched the Culture of Freedom Initiative to strengthen marriages and prevent divorces. The 3-year initiative ran from 2016 to 2018 and coincided with a 24% drop in local divorce rate. Oh, that's good news. Life is about family. Our hard work in Duval County shows that when churches adopt best practices and leverage big data, they can make a real difference in people's lives. Proud to have embraced family stability in Jacksonville and looking forward to working with churches to apply the Jacksonville model across America. When married couples have access to 21st century marital resources, they're better equipped to work through their problems and remain together in healthy and loving relationships. From 2016 to 2018, the COFI reached more than 11,000 adults per year for a total of approximately 50,000 people. Partnering with Tallahassee, Lived a Life, and a range of churches and other nonprofits, COFI sponsored more than 28 million digital impressions advertising a pro-marriage message in Duval County. The initiative had a budget of approximately $1.75 million per year of money that was spent well, apparently. Here's a dramatic footage, and obviously I'm not going to show you the footage on radio. I'm not even going to show it to you on Facebook. But there's footage of a coach who disarms and then embraces a student. Prevents potential school shooting. Then it was just me and the student. It was a real emotional time. It was emotional for him. It was emotional for me. In that time, I felt compassion. A lot of times, especially when you're young, you don't realize what you're doing until it's over, says Coach Keenan Lowe. A potential school shooting was prevented when a Portland, Oregon student holding a rifle was disarmed by a high school coach. The heroic act was caught on surveillance video at Park Rose High School. Keenan Lowe, a track and football coach, is seen on video walking into a classroom and then is dramatically seen emerging out of the classroom with a shotgun which he took from the student. You know, I understand and I don't. I understand that, well, let me tell you what I first don't understand. What I first don't understand is the fact that whenever we see one of these school shooting stories, we want in this society to immediately start attacking the availability of guns. The means of demise makes no difference. Wouldn't make any difference if the student had a explosive device. Wouldn't make any difference if the student had a machete. Wouldn't make any difference if the student drove into the school with a dump truck, cement truck, school bus, semi-truck. It wouldn't make any difference the method of demise. So that's the first thing that bothers me about these stories. The problem with most of these stories is a couple of factors. Bullying and not having an identity. Searching for an identity. So when you're a young person out there and you're being bullied, and you have no identity, and you have no purpose, you have no hope, you have no sense of self-worth, then why not? Why not? But this coach decided that, listen, this human being that's about to perpetrate or trying to perpetrate this act is a human being. And he could have been the first one shot. Could have been the first casualty. he just put himself out there to say, hey, no, there's more to life than this revenge, this anger, this bitterness you have inside. So it's a good story. I mean, this is one of the positive stories. Okay. Here's another story that I would say kind of piggybacks on that story. Our boys are under attack, and I mean our girls are too, don't get me wrong. But our young men in society are under severe attack. They're being hit on all sides. They're told that masculinity's toxic. They have higher rates of suicide, imprisonment, high school dropout rates, drug addiction rates. Our young men are being assaulted. They're being attacked. Now here's the shallow woke. You know, you've heard that hashtag woke, I'm woke. Sorry, you ain't crap. Unless you're woke in Jesus Christ, your wokeness is meaningless. Because your wokeness doesn't offer any hope to anyone. But we're being woke, and we're being scolded, and we're being spanked in the media and society for merely being male, merely having testosterone, merely being masculine. And this article says that their shallow woke scolding won't save white boys from the alt-right. Well, it won't save shallow white boys from the alt-left either. In a recent article, the newspaper formerly known as the New York Times, get that? A newspaper formerly known as the New York Times offers an eye-catching headline. Racists are recruiting. Watch your white sons. The image is an inspired piece of pop art, a blonde-haired, gangly boy disappearing into a giant iPhone made of writhing snakes. One shoe still outside the phone, the shoelace is untied, and the tag on his shirt sticks out against his neck. It's a perfect visual encapsulation of vulnerability entrapped by evil. The author is Joanna Schrader, is a mommy with bylines at the Huffington Post and other outlets who frequently writes about raising sons. In recent months, she's become especially vocal about the alt-right, the white nationalist gamer culture, and the vulnerability of boys online to Nazi recruitment. This article is a summary of what she's learned, and what she wants to pass on to other moms like her. Well, so far, so good. Alt-right online culture is indeed toxic, callous, and dangerous. It's perilously easy these days for disillusioned young men to fall down a rabbit hole and wander into some very dark places. there's also dark, hideous places they can fall down on the alt left. So let's just be fair across the board, that let's not just pick out something that they don't understand. I mean, these people on the right, they have feelings that they're being ignored in life, and people need to speak to those feelings, or if you keep ignoring those feelings, then you're just going to constantly have the same problems. I don't see the Antifa young men out there fighting, overturning cars, setting fire to things, breaking up private and personal property, public, private, and personal property. I don't see those guys as being any better. So as long as we're just speaking out against violence on whichever side of the aisle it's on, I'm all for it. But I get especially irritated when they only want to point to young men on the right, and they don't want to point the same finger at the just as destructive, just as violent young men who are on the left. You know, ask that gay writer who was punched in the face and hit on the head with all sorts of objects, who was simply reporting on Antifa. We need a thoughtful op-ed clearly outlining what the alt-right is and the actual dangers it poses to our boys. But apparently, unfortunately, Ms. Schrader's piece is not that op-ed. Schrader bursts out of the gate with what it's meant to be a dark, ominous opening anecdote about a car ride with their son. She overhears them in the back seat with friends crowing "triggered" over a meme on their phone. Whereupon she tells us with an absolutely straight face she almost lost control of the car. If the reader here begins to wonder whether Miss Schrader is quite up to the task of calmly navigating land transportation, the rest of the article won't set your mind at rest. In another anecdote delivered in a ponderous blow-by-blow, she recalls catching a Hitler meme on her son's phone out of the corner of her eye and snatching it to have a closer look at it. Hold on a minute, was that Hitler? I've been able to track down the original meme, but if Miss Schrader's interpretation is accurate, the gist of it seems to be kind of an elaboratory, unsavory joke that can find its ultimate origins in alt-right troll dens. As Schroeder tells the story, her son hadn't even been aware of the meaning of that meme and liked it, assuming it was innocuous. It may be worth injecting here that an alt-right memery can indeed get very ugly very fast, uglier than rather clumsily veiled memes. Miss Schroeder seems to be describing. In general, the idea of noting earmarks of an alt-right meme and teaching your son to practice caution isn't unreasonable. Dramatically snatching away your son's phone in a moment, an image of Hitler flickers on the screen, then writing a New York Times op-ed advertising for the whole world that he accidentally liked the wrong kind of meme on Instagram, slightly less reasonable. It would have been far more constructive for Miss Schroeder to introduce her sons to figures like David French or Ben Shapiro, who've been on the receiving end of alt-right hate mail. Then there, for this instance, the ugly instant when the Milo Yiannopoulos tweeted a picture of a black baby at Shapiro upon the birth of his son. However, Miss Schroeder is apparently incapable of computing the idea that the alt-right wouldn't be Ben Shapiro's biggest fans. While rattling off her list of extremist media, she careens breathlessly from 4chan to PragerU to the Daily Stormer to Jordan Peterson, barely pausing to note that some of the things might not be exactly like some of the other things. But of course, this article wouldn't be complete without the obligatory Jordan Peterson reference. While conceding that Peterson and other IDW figures are more mainstream, Schroeder casually wedges the clinical psychologist in between paragraphs about white supremacist outlets and gaming forums. She writes that Peterson's conservative perspective on feminism and gender are very popular young men and often a path to more extreme content and ideologies. Now, this is from the advice columnist who offers ethical sexting tips and writes open letters to her sons telling them love and sex needn't have anything to do with each other, or that she will be proud if they become cool enough to bed with multiple girls or multiple boys. Meanwhile, Jordan Peterson tells boys that casual sex is an oxymoron and offers practical advice on how to quit pornography, something Miss Schroeder should appreciate. Here he's chatting with a fan who came to a healthier understanding of sex and sexuality by taking Peterson's wisdom to heart. A clinical psychologist right in my own town offered a story with me about a young man who was the archetypical aggressively foul-mouthed, female objectifying, porn-addicted high school jock until he encountered Peterson. The difference before and after, she said, was night to day. But naturally, as someone whose ideas of researching Jordan Peterson appears to be copy-pasting whatever Vox has to say about him, Schroeder is blissfully obvious to these sorts of awkward data points. Schroeder found an author who conjectures that young men are drawn to toxic online communities because they want to feel if they're part of a heroic struggle. But Mrs. Schroeder doesn't need my advice. Her game plan's all mapped out. In a column entitled 18 Ways to Raise Feminist Boys, Schroeder suggests that such helpful tips as buying dolls for your boy toddler, playing house, or asking him if he'd like to be the mommy She has guides to media consumption too, including lists of female-centric book and TV series to make your boys watch, plus invaluable tips on how to handle the old media. Have your teens brainstorm the ways in which James Bond should have shown more respect. How about pattern your young boys to be like Jesus Christ? Ms. Schroeder? Ms. Schroeder also shares her secret sauce for deconstructing terms like snowflake. Who's more of a snowflake, she asks her son with relish, the person who wants the people to stop using racial slurs and mocking gay people, or someone who complains about the phrase happy holidays at Christmas time? She also has a game plan for teaching her sons how to think about race, particularly recommending Shelley Tocklick's Witnessing Whiteness as a how-to guide. One blurber gives this taste of the book. Shelley brings to light the most important book about race and the generation. Is whiteness bad in and of itself? When is it just part of the social, historical, and cultural legacy of people? And what is the prison poison that this legacy bequeaths us? Shelley herself informs her readers that our first step is to identify the ways our whiteness emerges. Okay, quit trying to shame people for their race. Isn't that what you're telling us we don't do to black people? Race shame? Are you seriously trying to shame somebody for being white? If Ms. Schroeder sincerely believes any of this is going to have any measurable, helpful, usual effect on her white sons, I don't know what to tell her. Truly, I don't. Some may say I'm being too harsh with someone who, for all her foolish and ineffectual finger wagging, at the end of the day is still a mom of boys who's generally scared of at least some of the things she should be scared of. And I confess that the sort of person who instructs teenage boys that their sex lives and their love lives can run on parallel tracks does not awaken my better angels. But the tiny grain of truth buried in Schroeder's smarmy fluff is that there's a real threat on the right wing that can have attraction for boys, young men who are bored, aimless, and looking for a transgressive thrill. But there's the same attraction on the left. Ironically, her brand of woke scolding could not have been better calculated to put off the sort of young man who already feels like he's constantly scolded and doesn't understand why. In other words, exactly the sort who wanders into an alt-right internet forum. But by sweeping all non-conforming right-of-center commentary aside, the Overton window with one grand gesture, Schroeder cuts them off from the antidote. In fact, she should be so lucky if she catches her son watching a Jordan Peterson lecture. They might have actually learned something about manhood. They might have actually learned something about human nature. They might have learned something about what makes men do evil things. And in the process, she might have learned something about their own hearts. But hey, at least she'll make sure they learn about ethical sexting, so then there's that. Got that going for them when they die. Ethical sexting. I don't think there's anything ethical about sexting. First off, don't ever put anything out on the internet you don't want to be seen. And I'm just going to tell you young girls out there, and I'm just going to be blunt with you, because I'm a guy and I know this stuff. I don't care how loving and how wonderful and how tender you think that guy you're madly in love with is. There's about a 90% chance you send him a nude photo of yourself, all his buddies are going to see that photo. Now, I'm just telling you, that's the way it is. And you show your buddies that photo, there's a pretty good chance that photo may get spread around school. There's no ethical, safe sexting. Period. Don't do it. I have a story that we'll get to after the SRN news break, and that is the genesis of human dignity and what the world owes the Bible. So, let's go
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes.
With SRN News, I'm Keith Peters in Washington. President Trump says he still wants to get all U.S. troops out of Syria, but Israel and Jordan have asked him to keep some in Syria.
We've been asked by Israel and Jordan to leave a small number of troops. Is a totally different section of Syria near Jordan and close to Israel. And that's a totally different section. That's a totally different mindset.
President Trump says the U.S. fought with the Kurds but does not owe them protection.
Nobody ever committed, gee, if you do this, we're going to do that, we're going to stay with you forever. Nobody ever said that.
Republicans in the House will force a vote today to officially rebuke Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff over his handling of the Trump impeachment process. Correspondent Bob Agnew reports.
The resolution aimed at censuring Schiff comes as Democrats hold behind closed-door depositions aimed at crafting articles of impeachment against the president. The efforts being led by Republican Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona. The GOP accusing Schiff of numerous missteps, including lying about whether his committee had contact with a whistleblower prior to his complaint. The measure also complains that Schiff misled the public when he exaggerated the president's comments during a conversation with the president of Ukraine. Bob Agnew reporting.
Authorities say severe thunderstorms are responsible for the deaths of 3 people in eastern Oklahoma. Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation spokeswoman Brooke R. Beitman says 2 teenage boys died of carbon monoxide poisoning late Sunday in Waleetka, about 80 miles east of Oklahoma City. She says the 14 and 15-year-old boys were using a portable gas generator in a travel trailer after the storms knocked out power in the area. Meanwhile, the tornado that ripped through Dallas last night had a maximum wind speed of 140 miles an hour. The agency rated the Sunday night tornado as EF3. On Wall Street, the Dow by 57 points. The Nasdaq rose 73. The S&P advanced 20. Oil down 47 cents to close at $53.31 a barrel. This is SRN News. Wycliffe Associates is starting Bible translation in a part of the world where being a Christian can get you killed.
The governments are hostile towards Christianity and even some of the religious groups in country, making it very difficult for folks to even express their faith.
Spokesman Tim Nye says he can't even reveal what region he's talking about.
We have friends, we have those that we have spent time with and come to love and appreciate, that we just want to be, mindful and careful.
Several hundred translations are getting underway. At least 12 people have been arrested on allegations of plotting, threatening, or carrying out anti-Semitic attacks in the U.S. since the massacre at a Pittsburgh synagogue nearly a year ago. The Anti-Defamation League also reports at least 50 incidents in which people are accused of targeting Jewish institutions' property since a gunman killed 11 worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue near Pittsburgh on October 27th. This is SRN News. Russian hackers have used Iranian tech tools to mask their identities as they disrupt important sites.
The so-called Turla group, also known as Waterbug or Venomous Bear, is widely reported to be associated with Russian actors. Now the US National Security Agency and Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre say Turla had acquired control of the tools and infrastructure of Iranian hacking groups for their attacks in an attempt to mask their identity. The attacks extracted documents from multiple sectors, including governments, and were mostly carried out in the Middle East. Charles de Ledesma, London.
A group of state attorneys general say they're still pushing to finalize a nationwide settlement over the toll of opioids with companies in the drug industry. There were talks through last week on a deal potentially worth $48 billion before companies reached a smaller $260 million deal to end claims with 2 Ohio counties. More details at srnnews.com. I'm Keith Peters in Washington.
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes.
But the salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. He is their strength in times of trouble. Psalms 27:39.
Every weekday on the Power of God, KPOG 102.9 FM, and live on webcast1live.com. Join us for a view from the pew. Should you be offended, provoked, triggered, intimidated, shocked, confused, or inspired to think independently, call our studio lines at 515-442-KPOG and join the conversation. After all, it's your voice we want to hear. The View from the Pew on KPOG and webcast1live.com. Weekdays from 4 to 6 on the Power of God.
Now, here's today's host, Frank the Verse Thomas.
Thank you. It is Frank the Verse Thomas here at View from the Pew, heard every day, Monday through Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. here at Jordan Crossing Church. If you'd like to join the show with your comments, your input, you can do so by logging down this number in your contact list.
We want to hear from you. So give us a call on the Service Legends Talk and Text line, 515-442-5764. That's 515-442-KPOG.
All right. So here we are with this story. What's the genesis of human dignity? What would you say? Christ. God naturally is a creator. God creates beings to love and to be loved. And certainly if you someone who wants to love and to be loved, certainly you want to extend human dignity to everyone. What the world owes the Bible. In his novel, The Bleak House, Charles Dickens introduces us to Harold Skimpole, a man who seems charming and reasonable, but is quickly revealed to be a mooch and a parasite. Skimpole lives comfortably off his friends. Even worse, he believes he's entitled to a standard of living his friends provide, giving no thought to what it took to make his life comfortable in the first place. Western culture is Skimpole-like. Skimpole-like. In other words, we take ideas such as freedom and human dignity for granted without ever stopping to think where those ideas came from in the first place. Well, we just evolved, Verse. Come on. Get with it. Do you know anything, Verse? We all started out to be a primate. Then all of a sudden, we just decided that we're going to start caring for each other and give each other freedom and human dignity. Where'd these ideas come from? Well, I guess the apes. Well, maybe it was the sharks. Maybe it was Jaws. You think the great white gives a crap about freedom and human dignity? They'll give you some freedom and human dignity just as they bite you in half. Just where exactly did freedom and human dignity come from? Well, we came from the animals, you know. What's the law of the jungle? Kill or be killed. Eat or be eaten. Just ask Dr. David Mackereth, who for 26 years worked for Britain's National Health Service, mostly in emergency and accident wards. By all accounts, he was an excellent doctor. 2018, Mackereth was assigned to Britain's Department for Work and Pensions as disability assessor. During his training, a senior employee told Mackereth and others they should always address transgender people by their preferred pronoun, in line with the department's policy. When Mackereth told the senior employee that, as a Christian, he could not in good conscience use pronouns that way, he was informed if he refused to follow the policy, he was at risk of losing his job. A few days later, when he reiterated that he could not follow that policy in good conscience, he was fired. Mackereth appealed his sacking to an employment tribunal, saying his rights to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion had been violated. He told the panel that for religious reasons he could not refer to any 6-foot-tall bearded man as a she or a her. Then he cited Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image, in the image of God he created them, male and female, he created them. Well, given the state of British culture right now, it's not surprising that Makareth lost his appeal. What is surprising is just how full Skimpole-like the tribunal went in its ruling. The tribunal said, I quote, belief in Genesis 1:27 is a lack of belief in transgender. Conscientious objection to transgenderism, in our judgment, is incompatible with human dignity and a conflict with the fundamental rights of others. This is like finding milk in your supermarket and rejecting that it has any part at all by dairy farmers or cows. Where'd the milk come from? There has to be a source, according to my friend Christian. What's your source? My friend Christian, the agnostic, the nice, kind, polite agnostic. And no, he's not an atheist because he's got more Bibles than you and me and combined. But my friend Christian will always chide me to provide a source. Well, I'm going to chide you, Mr. Skimpole. What is your source of human dignity? And freedom. What's your source for that? It didn't come from the animal world. You have no freedom in the animal world. So if you think you can find milk in your supermarket and it doesn't have anything to do with dairy farmers or cows, the Bible verse cited by Makareth, they're spelling that slightly different. They're going capital K instead of small k. And repudiated by the tribunal is the singular basis for the idea of human dignity and fundamental rights. Without God created man in his own image, de facto there is no freedom or human dignity. The only dignity anyone will give is what they're willing to give. The truth is that had Scripture not introduced the image of God to the world's first lexicon in the first place, the notion of human dignity wouldn't exist. Even raging atheist Friedrich Nietzsche acknowledged that. The ancient world didn't recognize universal human dignity, nor did any other philosophy other than Christianity even ever imagine it. Antediluvian man didn't certainly extend freedom and human dignity. Whatever they took by violence and bloodshed. They wanted your wife, they wanted your house, they wanted your children, they wanted your belongings, they wanted your animals, whatever they wanted, they took it by violence and bloodshed. How much freedom and human dignity do you think Genghis Khan offered? I'm not saying, of course, that Christians have always lived up to this truth, either personally or within their societies. What I am saying is that no one would ever recognize it as truth had Christianity not grounded it in some way. Or as another atheist author and philosopher, Luke Ferry, wrote in his brief History of Thought, Christianity was to introduce the notion that men are equal in dignity. An unprecedented idea at the time to which the world owes its entire democratic inheritance. The history of the idea of human dignity is striking and clear, but it's also ignored by a culture that, like Skimpole, never thinks about where good things of modern life really come from. See, friend, you live under the umbrella. If you lived in a Muslim world in many Islamic countries, you wouldn't be free to be a homosexual or an atheist. You don't understand, it's the umbrella of Christianity, it's the umbrella of God that respects any human rights or human dignity. My friend Chris John once posted this article about narcissism versus empathy. And I would argue that the atheist is the natural narcissist because the world is about them. And he would argue, well, atheists can be empathetic too. Well, and that's not my argument. My argument is that when God rains on the farmers who's praying for his corn crop, it also rains on the marijuana plants that some dastardly character threw into the field. So, I would argue that God reigns on both the wicked and the righteous. God reigns on all. Doesn't discriminate where the raindrops fall. Same way with the Holy Spirit. God's not going to discriminate. When the Holy Spirit woos mankind. So I would simply again argue with my friend Chris John, what's your source? Where did consciousness, where did love, where did hate, where did mystery, where did knowledge, where did education come from? Man couldn't evolve himself into that. Not in a quadrillion years could man evolve from an animal to some sort of loving human being who protects the elderly and protects the young. The idea of human dignity is striking and clear, but it's also ignored by a culture that, like Skimpole, never thinks about where the good things of modern life really come from. Christians can serve the world by reminding it of its own history, not least of which because human dignity will never last if it is untethered from the one and only source. Source! There's my source, Christian, the God. God's the source of everything. Satan has no independent source apart from God. Satan has merely twisted any truth or principle God has already set down. If there was a true Sabbath, Satan only perverted it to a counterfeit Sabbath. If there was true, pure sex, Satan can only counterfeit and reproduce it as impure. Satan has no ability to create nothing on his own, anything on his own. God is the source. And just because some of you atheists out there don't believe it, that you think empathy is some force in the universe that somehow you can plug into apart from God. Maybe you're some Star Wars guru that believes in the Force or the dark side. Man could never evolve to that kind of source in a million years. It's just impossible. Freedom and human dignity will never last if it's untethered from the one and only source that's ever gave it to the world in the first place. So if you untether this place from God, you ain't got no empathy. I don't care how good an atheist you are. If you unplug this world from God, I don't care how good an atheist you are, you're not going to support freedom and freedom of speech and human dignity and human rights. It's not possible. All right. So we'll get to our Sabbath school for today. John George, pardon me, says, do you suppose Genghis was a con artist? Well, yeah, he was. Oh, Genghis, he was a con artist. They say old Genghis is responsible for upwards of many as 150 to 150 million deaths. Well, likely as many rapes, not himself personally, but his men. Yeah, old Genghis, he was a con artist. So, hey, John, up there in the great state of Minnesota, up in Northfield, the bastion of conservatism, Northfield. John's probably like, when did that happen? So, good to hear from you, buddy. So we're going to get to our Sabbath school lesson for today. And Sabbath, obviously. I'm going to start out here. Memory text for the week. But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, so that they could not make them cease till a report could go to Darius. The written answer was returned concerning this matter, but the eye of God was upon the elder of the Jews, so that they could not make them cease till a report could go to Darius. Then a written answer was returned concerning the matter. Ezra 3-6 is structured thematically, covering different historical periods of opposition to the rebuilding of the temple. Recognizing this thematic approach will help to clarify the overall message. Ezra is mentioned for the first time by name in Ezra 7:1. Now after this, in the reign of Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, Ezra, the son of Seraiah, and Azariah, and the son of Hilkiah. With his arrival in 457 BC, things changed, and the city of Jerusalem with its walls began to be spasmodically rebuilt. 13 years later, Nehemiah arrived, sent by Artaxerxes in 444 BC, and the building of the wall was finally resumed. Although opposition was intense, the work was completed in 52 days. And that was a hard 52 days, brothers, sisters. They built with one hand and had a sword in the other. People who weren't building had spears and bows in their hands. Resistance to the work of God is a prevalent theme in the two books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Therefore, it is not surprising that the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem incited opposition and persecution. Wherever you turn in today's world, the work of the Lord's resisted. It's much like Cain and Abel. Abel didn't do anything really to incite Cain's anger and hatred. It was just his mere presence. It was just his mere godly presence. The evil, the darkness, the hatred inside Cain was naturally opposed to the kind, gentle light shining from Abel. And that kind, loving, shining light shining forth from Abel disturbed Cain's peace. And so it will be all through history. When the light of God goes forth and shines forth on this world, it is going to stir up enmity. It's going to stir up hatred. It's going to stir up bitterness. It's going to stir up anger. Because you're disrupting their peace. Just can't have no peace with all that light around. You know that feeling you get when you are trying to sleep and you like to sleep in pitch black and there's that light that just you can't keep out your eyes? That's the same feeling the wicked get when your light, your godly Christian light, shines forth in this world, and it disturbs them peace. It disturbs their sleep. It just upsets them. You didn't have to really do anything other than just be light. You find that true in your life? I've found it true in my life. I found there's people in my life, it doesn't make any difference what I do. Right, wrong, and different. It disrupts them. It upsets them. Just my mere presence. So, Sunday. Opposition begins. Ezra 4:1-5 says, Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles are building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, Let us build with you. This was the Samaritans, for the most part. People of Samaria, Samaritans. Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. And we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. But Zerubbabel, who was the governor, Jeshua, who was his priest, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said unto them, You have nothing to do with us in building the house to our God. For we alone will build unto the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and they bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purposes all the days of King Cyrus of Persia, until the reign of Darius the king of Persia. And that would be Darius Hystaspes. Darius the Mede, if you remember, Cyrus was his nephew. Cyrus the Mede was the nephew and general of Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede is the one who threw Daniel in the lion's den. Cyrus the Mede took the throne about 2 years after Cyrus the Mede took the throne about 2 years after Darius the Mede. So the reign of Darius the king of Persia here would be talking about Darius Hystaspes. Why do you think the remnant Israelites refused the help of other people in the building of the temple? Well, I'm sure it wasn't like they couldn't have used help. But this help was turned down for one reason, because the Samaritans were idol worshippers. Now they profess to believe in the same God as Israel. They profess to believe in Jehovah. And they said that they only kept their pesky idols around just to remind them of the God of Jehovah. And they merely had those pesky idols around to remind them not to worship the pesky idols. And that they really worship Jehovah. But in reality, they really worship the idols. So if Israel would have accepted their help, it would have been leaving a back door for idolatry to march right back into God's house. On the surface, the request seemed kind of a kind, neighborly thing to do, so why turn down the help? In one sense, the answer is found in the text itself. The adversaries came to help them. Adversaries. That alone gives powerful testimony as why the Israelites acted as they were, because they were feigned friends. They feigned friendship. Second Kings 17, 24 to 41. And the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon. And they took possession of the Samaria and lived in its cities at the beginning of their dwelling there, so they did not fear God. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you've carried away and placed into the cities of Samaria, we do not know the God of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them, and behold, they are killing them, because they do not know the law of the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there and teach them of the law of the God of the land. So one of the priests whom he had carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. But every nation still made gods of his own and put them in with the shrines and high places that the Samaritans had made. Every nation in the cities in which they had lived. The men of Babylon made idols. The men of Cuth made them. The men of Hamath. The Avites. And the Seraphites burned their children in the fire to their false gods. They also feared the Lord and appointed from them all sorts of people as the priests of high places who sacrificed for them in the shrines of high places. So they feared the Lord, but at the same time they still served their own gods after the manner of nations from whom they had been carried away. To this day they do according to the former manner. They do not fear God. They do not follow the statutes or the rules or the law, the commandment that the Lord commanded the children of Jacob. The Lord made a covenant with them and commanded them, "Ye shall not fear other gods, nor bow yourselves to them, or serve or sacrifice them, but you shall fear the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt with great power and with an outstretched arm. You shall bow yourselves to him, and him you shall sacrifice. And the statutes and the rules and the law, the commandment that he wrote for you, shall always be careful to do. Ye shall have no other gods before me. You shall not forget the covenant that I've made with you. You shall not fear other gods, but you shall fear the Lord, and he will deliver you out of the hands of all your enemies." However, they would not listen, but they did according to their former manner. So these nations feared the Lord and also served their carved images. Their children did likewise, and their children, as did their fathers, and they do so to this day. This explains these people were imported from other nations into Samaria and the surrounding region after the northern kingdom Israelites were deported. The king of Assyria sent them priests who were to teach them how to worship the God of the land, that is, the God of Israel. However, the resulting religion incorporated the Canaanite gods as well. Therefore, the Israelite remnant was afraid that this religion would be brought into their temple worship. Hence, the best and smartest thing to do was to do as they did, which was to say no, but no thank you. We must remember, too, and why all this was happening to begin with. It was their forefathers' constant compromise with pagan faiths around them that led to the destruction of the temple, as well as to their exile, presumably while they were in the very process of building the temple anew. The last thing they would want to do would be get too closely aligned with the people around them. Don't leave a back door. Any good computer software programmer obviously has to leave back door into the software not to get locked out, and Satan did not want locked out. He wanted a foothold. He wanted a back door back into the people. Now he got it anyway, because the people, you know the story, the people eventually failed again and again and again. But at that moment in time, they knew what they knew what mistakes they had made in the past, and they were trying very hard not to make the same mistakes. Now ultimately they did, but they gave it an effort. Now, what else was going on here? Ezra 4:4-5. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now there was false reports. There were Tobiah and Geshem and Sanballat, just discouraging. There was adversaries. There was the Tekoites, who refused to lend their neck to help building of the temple and the walls and the city. It was just friends, enemies, and sometimes you expect it from your enemies, but you really don't expect it from your friends. If I can find this here. Tekoite nobles refused their necks in the work of God. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, adversaries professing friendships. There were fake reports that Nehemiah was plotting against the Persian monarch. They didn't want Jerusalem restored to its former glory or power. They plotted Nehemiah's death. But the opposition and discouragement that the builders in Nehemiah's day met from open enemies and pretended friends is typical of the experiences that those who will have today who work for God. Christians are not only tried by anger, contempt, and cruelty of their enemies, but they're also tried by the indolence, the inconsistency, the lukewarmness, and treachery of avowed friends and helpers. Derision and reproach are hurled at them, and the same enemy that leads to contempt, a favorable opportunity, at a favorable opportunity, will use more and more cruel and violent measures. So, again, some people might say, with friends like those, who needs enemies? All right. So, it was just the right thing to do, because one, it was to be demonstrated that God is sufficient to the task, and that God just didn't want a foothold in his people for idolatry to quickly return. Think about how easily they could have rationalized accepting this help. What does 2 Corinthians 6:14 have to say to us in this context? Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness to do with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light to do with darkness? You just don't need you don't need the headache. You don't need the heartache. You don't need the pleasing and the smooth words of slick. Sometimes I think of this in the context of slick groom politicians and their just easy way with words. And they lull you into a belief that they're going to do something. In reality, they're as empty wells. They're as shallow as an empty well. So the people of God never enter into covenants with the unbeliever. You don't do it. You don't enter into marriages with the unbeliever. You don't enter into businesses with the unbeliever. You don't enter into covenants with the unbeliever. And while these people professed to give lip service to God, they still clung to those idols, and they clung to those idols harder than they clung to God. But yeah, everybody gets weak. Everybody gets weary. Everybody would like to say, hey, love to have some help. But you just have to be careful who you're accepting the help from. Now to Monday's lesson. Prophets and courage. Unfortunately, the opposition the Jews encountered from the surrounding nations, as described in Ezra chapters 4 to 6, left them afraid and unwilling to work on the temple. As mentioned before, in the reign of Ahasuerus, which would be Xerxes, they wrote accusation against Judah and Jerusalem. This is a copy of the letter sent to Artaxerxes the king. Well, it's okay. This is a letter written to King Artaxerxes, not Xerxes. Your servants, the men of the province beyond the river, send greeting. Let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us had gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They're finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now it be known to the king of this city, if the city is rebuilt and the wall is finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and the royal revenue will be impaired. Now, because we eat of the salt of the palace, and it's not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor, you get a little this feigned outrage, this feigned honor they have for the king. Therefore we send and inform the king in order that a search may be made in the book of records of your fathers, and you will find in the book of records and learn that this city is a rebellious city, hurtful to king and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from old, and that's why it was laid to waste. We make known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls finished, you will then have no possession in the province beyond the river. King sent an answer. And this is the answer. I made a decree, and the search has been made, and it's been found that this city from old has risen against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made in it. And mighty kings have been over Jerusalem, who ruled over the whole province beyond the river, to whom tribute, custom, and toll were paid. Therefore make a decree that these men shall be made to cease, and that this city will not be rebuilt until a decree is made by me, and take care not to be slack in the manner. Why should damage grow to hurt the king? Then the copy of the letter was read to Rehum, the scribe, and their associates, and they went at haste. Their feet couldn't get them there fast enough. To the Jews at Jerusalem, and by force made them cease their work. Then the work of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, stopped, and it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, the king of Persia. All right, so back and forth, these false charges and false allegations that were made that somehow they didn't intend on paying their toll and their tribute and their custom. As mentioned before, Ezra 4:6 to 6:22 is not written in chronological order. Therefore, we will look at chapter 5 before looking at chapter 4. Ezra 5:1-5 says, Now the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddu, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel, who was over them. Then Zerubbabel and Jeshua arose to rebuild the house of God that is in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. At the same time, Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shethar and their associates came to them and spoke to them who gave you a decree to build this house and finish this structure? They also asked them of this, what are the names of the men who are building the building? But the eye of their God was on the elders of the Jews, and they did not stop until the report should reach Darius, and then an answer returned by letter concerning it. The Jews had basically stopped because they were afraid. But God had sent them to Judah to rebuild the temple and the city, and he had a plan. Since they were afraid, he had to do something in order to encourage them. Therefore, he called his 2 prophets to step in. Human opposition doesn't stop God, even if the Jews contributed to this opposition by their own actions. God did not abandon them. He worked through the prophets to motivate and propel them to action. One of the things that Zechariah done in particular was to talk to the people who were remaining in exile. What are you doing? Get out of there. Go home. Obviously, in the original group that left the monarchy, Ezra took 50,000 people, 40 priests and 200 teachers, ministers, and helpers to help instruct the people in the law. But while he took 50,000 with him, there was hundreds of thousands who remained behind. That would tie in the story of Queen Esther and Xerxes, the king, or Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. I'll have to get on Google and look up how to pronounce that. Probably butchering it, but he ain't around to complain. So I'll just call him Xerxes. And that's distinct from Artaxerxes. But one of the things that Zechariah in particular done was to continually call the people to go home. Come home. You remember the story of Esther and Mordecai and Haman, and how Haman was plotting to rid the kingdom of those pesky old Jews. Mordecai was Esther's uncle. Esther's parents were dead, so Mordecai kind of took Esther under his wing as his goddaughter to protect. Well, when Esther found out about the plot, obviously her tears and her distraught nature carried a lot of weight with the king, because the king was fascinated by Esther's beauty, Esther's presence. Well, what's wrong? What's wrong, honey? What can I do to help you? Well, this person's plotting to kill my people. Well, who is this rascal? Well, it was indeed Haman, who Xerxes had put in charge to leave to Xerxes to do with these people what he thought he should do. Well, in the end, they were building gallows to hang the Jews, and Mordecai become the head of the king's wishes, and Haman and his henchmen were hung on their own gallows. Haggai 1:1-15 says, in the second year of Darius, in the 6th month, first day, the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel, the governor, and Joshua the high priest, thus says the Lord, these people say the time is not yet come to rebuild the house of God. Then the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet. It is time for you yourselves to dwell in the paneled houses, or your sealed houses. Is it time for you to live in your sealed houses while God's house lies in ruins? Now, therefore, says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You've sown so much and harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourself, but no one's warm. And he who earns wage does so to put them in a bag with holes. Consider your ways. Go up to the hills and bring wood and build the house, that I may take pleasure in it and I may be glorified, says the Lord. You looked for much, and behold, it came to little. When you brought it home, I blew it away. Why, declares the Lord of hosts? Because my house still lies in ruins, while each of you busies himself with his own house. Therefore the heavens above you have withheld the dew, and the earth has withheld its produce. The people were impoverished because they was putting the needs of God second to the needs of their self. And I've called for a drought on the land and the hills, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and on the things the ground brings forth, on man and beast and all of their labors. Then Zerubbabel the governor, Joshua the priest, and all the remnant people obeyed the voice of God, the words of Haggai and the prophet, as their Lord God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the messenger of the Lord, spoke to the people with the Lord's message. I am with you, declares the Lord. And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the spirit of Joshua, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people, and they came and they worked on the house of the Lord their God on the 24th day of the month, in the 6th month, in the 2nd year of Darius the king. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah were raised up to meet the crisis. In stirring testimonies, these appointed messengers revealed to the people the cause of their trouble. Their temporal lack of prosperity was the result of a neglect to put God's interests first. Prophets declared. Had the Israelites honored God, had they shown him due respect and courtesy by making the building of his house their first work, they would have been invited to his presence and his blessing. This is from Prophets and Kings, page 573 to 574. All right. So is that message any less relevant today? Is there temporal things you need? Is there things you're lacking? Is there things you're going without? Then I guess the message here is to put God's cause first. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and the rest shall be added unto you. So, this is a timeless lesson. This is a timeless truth that can't be ignored. John says, everybody thinks they're a comedian. Blessings on the rest of your day, week. John says goodbye. Well, goodbye, John. So back to our Sabbath lesson. Are you building up your treasures? Are you building up your castle? Are you building up your wealth and God's house lies in ruins? When you put your priorities straight, friend, when you put your priorities straight, it's always Jesus first. Others second. Yourself last. It's what they talk about, true joy. So, don't get any more timeless than that. You see, the Bible is really a linear story. It's not compartmentalized. It's not fragmented. It's linear. The same truth in Nehemiah's day is the same truth now. The same truth in Zechariah's day is the same truth now. The same truth in Haggai's day is truth now. Same truth in Ezra's day is true now. All the names and the faces and the places may have changed a little bit, but the principles are eternally true. God first, others second, yourself last. Love God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as thyself. Put your priorities in the order they should be in. So this has been Frank the Verse Thomas here at View from the Pew. And until tomorrow.
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes.